Why do some people feel energized when they are alone, while others feel uncomfortably lonely instead? Have you ever wondered about that? You might be the kind of person who leaves a social gathering feeling completely drained, even though everything seemed perfectly fine. You get home, close the door, and only when you're alone, you finally start to feel like yourself again. But then a familiar thought appears. Is something wrong with me? Why am I not like other people? Why don't I enjoy being in crowds? And why do I always need so much personal space? If you've ever felt this way, you are not alone. Many people go through this, but quietly assume it's a weakness. They think they are missing some kind of social skill, that they need to fix themselves in order to become more outgoing. But what if all of that is a misunderstanding? What if your preference for solitude is not a sign of deficiency, but a sign of a completely different kind of brain wiring? A system that works quietly, but extremely efficiently. It might sound strange, but neuroscience actually suggests something very interesting here. When you are alone, your brain does not simply turn off. In fact, it may start working in a completely different way, a way that most people rarely get to experience. And this could explain why you feel calmer, clearer, and even more thoughtful when you are by yourself. But this is only the surface, because the real difference is not whether you like being alone, it is how your brain processes the world around you. And once you understand that, the way you see yourself may completely change. So what is actually happening inside your brain when you are alone? And why does it make you feel so different from everyone else? Let's begin with a very important part of the brain, the one that controls how you think, react, and understand yourself. Let's start with a part of your brain that you use every single day, but rarely ever think about. This is the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for thinking, decision-making, and self-reflection. When you are in a crowd, this part of your brain has to handle multiple things at once. Other people's facial expressions, the surrounding noise, and subtle social signals that you don't even realize you're constantly analyzing. It's like trying to think clearly while standing in the middle of a busy highway during rush hour. But when you're alone, everything changes. The noise drops, external pressure disappears, and suddenly your brain finally has space to function properly. Studies show that when people are alone, the brain's self-referential system becomes more active. Not because you are trying to think harder, but because your brain finally has the chance to do so. And this is where things start to get interesting. Because this doesn't just affect how you think, it also affects how you experience pleasure and reward. And this is where the real difference begins to emerge. Most people respond strongly to dopamine, a chemical linked to excitement and stimulation. It's released when you get a message, a like, or experience something new. That's why many people constantly seek external stimulation. But not all brains are wired the same way. Some people, especially those who feel comfortable being alone, respond more strongly to another chemical, a quieter one, but much deeper. That chemical is called acetylcholine, and instead of creating intense excitement, it creates a calm, focused state. You don't need loud music. You don't need crowds. You don't need constant stimulation. Just a quiet space, and your mind begins to operate in a completely different way. This is why you can sit alone, read a book, or simply look out the window, and still feel completely fulfilled. It's not because you lack connection. It's because your reward system is operating differently. And once you understand this, one thing becomes very clear. You might not be different in a negative way. You are simply wired to experience the world differently. But this is still not the most interesting part, because when your brain enters this quiet state, something even more powerful begins to happen. When your brain becomes truly quiet, something very unusual begins to happen. It doesn't slow down in a negative way. Instead, it shifts into an entirely different mode, a state that most people rarely reach in their daily lives. Scientists call this the alpha and theta brainwave state. It sounds technical, but the meaning is actually quite simple. This is the state where your brain is no longer being pulled in every direction by the outside world. And when that happens, it starts connecting ideas you didn't even realize were related. Imagine your mind like a room full of scattered puzzle pieces. When you are busy, everything is messy, and you don't have time to organize anything. But when you are alone and things slow down, those pieces start coming together on their own. Thoughts that seemed completely unrelated suddenly connect. Questions you once ignored suddenly find answers. And sometimes you experience moments where everything just clicks. That's what many people call a eureka moment. What's interesting is that most people assume doing nothing means your brain is resting, but in reality, it's often the opposite. This might actually be when your brain is working at its highest level. No distractions, no interruptions, just pure thinking, but at a deeper layer. And this is why so many creative ideas appear in moments that seem meaningless on the surface. When you're walking alone, when you're taking a shower, or simply sitting still and doing nothing at all. But this also leads to a very common misunderstanding. If being alone has so many benefits, does that mean it pushes you away from the world? Does it make you less social over time? Or is something else happening that most people are not noticing at all? This question sounds reasonable, and you've probably wondered the same thing at some point. If being alone comes with so many benefits, then why does society constantly emphasize the need to socialize more? Why are people who prefer solitude sometimes seen as different or even as having a problem? But this is where neuroscience offers a completely different perspective. In reality, enjoying solitude does not mean you are less social. It may simply reflect that you are using your social energy in a more selective way. Researchers call this a tendency toward selective socialization. Instead of interacting with many people on a surface level, you tend to prioritize fewer relationships, but deeper ones. This is not about avoiding people. It is about optimizing your mental energy. Think of it like this. Some people keep the window of their social life wide open for everyone. They have many relationships, many conversations, many interactions. But others are more like a private space. They don't open the door for everyone, but when they do, those connections are much deeper and more meaningful. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. And this has a powerful effect on how your brain processes stress. When you constantly engage in social interaction, your brain has to process a large number of emotional signals at the same time. This can increase stress levels without you even realizing it. But when you spend time alone, your nervous system has a chance to reset. Studies show that people who intentionally spend time in solitude each day often have lower cortisol levels, meaning reduced stress. And this is not just a subjective feeling. It directly affects how you think and make decisions. When your mind is less stressed, you begin to see things more clearly. You stop reacting too quickly based on emotion. You are able to observe situations from a safer distance. It's like you are no longer standing inside the storm, but watching it from afar. But the most interesting part is not just that you feel calmer. It's how you begin to notice things that others might completely miss. And this is where the bigger picture starts to appear. If you look back at everything we've talked about, something interesting starts to emerge. Maybe your preference for being alone is not just a random habit, and it's not a weakness that needs to be fixed. It might actually be part of how your brain is optimized to process the world in a different way, a way that is slower, deeper, and less distracted. And this also explains a very interesting paradox. Some people who enjoy solitude also seem to understand others on a very deep level. It sounds contradictory at first, but it actually makes sense from a scientific perspective. Because when you truly understand your own inner world, you start recognizing similar emotions in other people. You don't always need words to understand how someone feels. You just observe and pick up on subtle signals that others often miss. While many people are caught in a fast-paced rhythm of life, constant reactions, and non-stop social interaction, you might be operating in a different state, a state of observation. Not outside of life, but viewing it from a wider perspective. This doesn't make you better or worse than anyone else, but it does create a different way of engaging with the world. A way that is less rushed, but often more accurate in many situations. And perhaps the most important thing here is how you see yourself. Instead of viewing your preference for solitude as something to fix, maybe it's something to understand correctly. Not everyone is designed to draw energy from crowds, and not everyone needs that to grow. Some people grow best when they have space to think, to observe, and to reconnect with themselves first. So the real question is not whether you should change. The real question is whether you truly understand how your brain works, because once you do, you start to see yourself in a completely different way. And maybe what you once thought was a weakness is actually what shapes the way you see the world in a way that not everyone can.